remember reading the news of this man, this, being appointed, and being a bit surprised, mainly because of his age. So that would have been the case, whatever his race, But I was also delighted because very often, young black men are in the news for not this sort of, thing. And so I was quite delighted. But I mean, if Cambridge were just ticking a box when they took him on, that's very wrong.
Now, the boss of Cambridge Professor Jason Arday ignored claims of plagiarism made back in 2023 by two academics, instead describing him as the best in the world in his field. Arday resigned on Wednesday from his position at Cambridge after the university announced it would investigate claims that the professor plagiarised some of his research. We can speak to Jacqueline McKenzie, an immigration and human rights lawyer at Lee Day, who's one of the people who signed an open letter in support of Jason Arday. Jacqueline, good morning.
Good morning.
And just to be clear, you are still supporting him today?
Well, I'm supporting him as a human being because I'm very worried about his possible mental state, given the way this story has been reported, if it turns out that he has done wrong. And I think there's quite a lot of evidence that suggests that there are real problems with his story. I don't know about the plagiarism, because the reason why I signed the letter in the first place is when it was presented to me, I was told that he'd been cleared of plagiarism by Liverpool John Moores, the university where he undertook the PhD. Now, I'm almost certain they're going to be reinvestigating this. Cambridge are carrying out an investigation, the governor's there. So we can't support any wrongdoing, any fraud, any, invention, that sort of thing. But I have put out a statement, because, well, firstly, because I signed the letter and everyone's asking me, what do I now think? And I'm making it clear that the letter was signed on the basis of information we were given at the time. This was about 2 weeks ago.
In terms of, I suppose, the reaction that you have witnessed to this, do you think it is proportional to what the accusations actually are?
I think yes and no, and that does sound a bit like a cop-out. I think one of the things that's concerned me is the extent of the reporting, the fact that his elderly parents were doorstepped. I mean, we've seen lots of reports of plagiarism in the past. Some of this has played out in the media because it's, the victim or the perpetrator rather has been high profile, and we've not seen the sort of scrutiny of their day-to-day lives and, as I said, the doorstepping of elderly parents, that sort of thing. We've never seen that before. However, in this case, I can understand the media frenzy and the interest, because there does seem to be quite a lot of things that don't seem to stack up. And if that's the case, then I suppose for me, from the media perspective, it's a good story.
In terms of how Cambridge have handled this and how Cambridge, I suppose, have been viewed in this, lots of the sort of suggestions have been that Cambridge took Arday in as a professor to sort of fulfil some quotas, that there might have been a DEI, a diversity and equality and inclusion motivation here. Is there a risk that this perception, I suppose, is that well-founded, that perception, as far as you are concerned, Jacqueline?
I don't know if it's well-founded. I don't know what Cambridge did or what it was thinking. I remember reading the news of this man, this, being appointed, and being a bit surprised, mainly because of his age. So that would have been the case, whatever his race, But I was also delighted because very often, young black men are in the news for not this sort of, thing. And so I was quite delighted. But I mean, if Cambridge were just ticking a box when they took him on, that's very wrong, because up and down this country and overseas, because academics and faculty come from all over the world in the UK, there are good quality, highly qualified people of black and Asian backgrounds. And so if they are found to have not scrutinised him properly and to have taken him on to tick some sort of box, then that is a shame. And it's also problematic for other black and Asian people who aspire to those roles.
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation, and we're glad to have it with you this morning, Jacqueline. Thank you. That's Jacqueline McKenzie, who is an immigration and human rights lawyer and who signed that open letter in support of Jason Arday. And I suppose with the disclaimer that we need to consider what this investigation will actually conclude. And makes a point about the mental state as well of Professor Jason Arday after the week that has been unfolding.
We're joined by Deputy Editor of The Spectator, Freddy Gray. Good evening.
Good evening, Kate. How are you?
Very well, thank you very much. Good to speak to you. And the author and journalist Ella Whelan. Excuse me, Ella Whelan. Good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Thanks for being with us. Let's dig into our first story, and that is of Jason Arday. Cambridge University is coming under fire after senior figures reportedly brushed off detailed plagiarism allegations against their star professor, claiming he had their full support. Tom Ball is a reporter for The Times who's been writing about this most recent revelation.
The two academics went to Kremen having initially gone to Arday for comment on this. So Harris had been looking at Arday's work as part of a different project that he was working on, and it was while reading through Arday's work that he noticed that these similarities and concerns. So he then wrote a very long and fulsome and I would say quite politely worded email to Arday, in which he didn't cast any aspersions, didn't make any assumptions, but just points out the fact that he'd noted these similarities and also a few sort of spelling and grammatical points in Arday's work as well. Arday didn't respond to that. A week goes past, so Harris writes again, and Arday then responds to that follow-up. The follow-up, which I've also seen, is very curt in its response and very defensive.
Well, Arday resigned on Wednesday amid mounting scrutiny after the faculty head, Professor Hilary Kremen, she was mentioned there at the start of that clip, initially dismissed warnings as racism and hailed him as the best in the world. The scandal has widened following revelations that Arday reported critics to the police, with the Met admitting today they'd dropped the ball after investigating one journalist for 4 months. That was their quote, dropped the ball. Where do we go on this, first of all? Ella, let's come to you, first of all. Do you feel sorry for Jason Arday?
Not really. I think that the interesting thing to this, for me, isn't necessarily about Arday, who you have to be very careful, because I think he's very fond of calling the police on journalists and other people, and also seems to be very litigious. So I pick my words wisely. I think that perhaps there have been some stretches in his descriptions of himself and his abilities. I mean, it's hard to believe that someone only learns to read and write at the age of 18 and then 2 years later goes to university, let alone then makes it to Cambridge, or does, however many marathons it was in however many days, 35
a
30
rather
days,
impossible amount, yes.
All of that seems kind of ridiculous. A little bit of me though thinks, well, if one were to be a chancer, it's quite a good tale. It would make for quite a good Netflix documentary, getting to the top of Cambridge. To me, the much more interesting thing, is the actions of people like Hilary Kremen, and in fact what was actually on the sort of application form for when Arday applied, with a very kind of explicit request from Cambridge for said, we need more women, we need more BAME, Black, Asian and minority ethnic people, and we need people with disabilities. So it's kind of like, the idea that merit or credentials or intellectual heft was the most important thing to be at one of the world's best universities obviously took second place to identity. I think that's the more interesting thing. The question should be asked at why on earth the police were ringing up people on the basis of someone's claims of hurt feelings, why the top university seems to have been enthralled to a personality on the basis of sort of wanting to whip themselves for allegations of racism, and more broadly sort of a real lack of courage within academia itself to sort of stand up for its own rigorousness. And this sort of it's just really cringeworthy watching that video with Hilary Kremen and Arday, and how sycophantic she is, and how sort of it just shows the sort of the patronising nature of identity politics in all its sort of grotesque form, and that's much more interesting to me than him himself.
Yeah, I mean, she was performative, wasn't she, in her endorsement of him, or it felt like she was making a point. Freddie, she didn't
making it up as well, maybe.
Well, yeah, she didn't just, and this is to repeat, Professor Hilary Cremin, head of the Faculty of Education at Cambridge University, and these are emails seen by the Times, and this is where Dr. David Harris, an academic at Plymouth, who'd been reviewing Arday's work as part of a wider research project, as had another academic, and Harris had written to Arday. And Arday essentially refused to ask any questions, and then said to him, "If you write to me again, you'll be considered, anything you write to me again will be considered bullying and harassment." When Harris did write again, saying, "Look, I really admire you, but I'd just like to clear up these issues of passages in your work which appear to be the same as passages in another person's work," the renowned epidemiologist Anja Memon. He was very complimentary, and again, the Times has seen this. Arday received that and reported him to the police for harassment. So you've got a really respected, youngest of his kind, respected academic from Cambridge University going to the police, and a black academic, and reporting harassment. And the police did not do their job properly, but he also used his position and his specialty, his sort of unique selling point, maybe, who knows, however you want to phrase it, he used his position and his influence. I think that played a part in the police's response to this, and they admit that was wrong. And they played a part as well, Freddie, I'll stop talking in just a minute, but I find this side of it fascinating too, in the defence of him by Professor Hilary Cremin. She said, essentially, we'll take a look at it, take down the article, we'll take a look at it. But by the way, Professor Arday spoke movingly about his ongoing experiences of direct and indirect racism and the conditions that he was living in whilst the 2008 article was being prepared in 2016. At this time, he was early in a career and living away from home while dealing with significant health issues. She's adding a sob story into it. She's adding unnecessary context into it. Freddie?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a sort of parable of our times, really. I mean, you have institutions, big, prestigious institutions like Cambridge University, an institution like the Met, that all wanted to believe a story that clearly didn't add up, lots of stories that didn't add up. And I was thinking a lot about it this week because Rod Liddle, the Times radio host, but also great Spectator columnist, died last weekend, and I was thinking I wish I could read Rod Liddle on this because it'd be the perfect subject for him. Just the absurdity of these very institutionally privileged people elevating somebody just because of his racial background, just because of his perceived disabilities, endlessly elevating him, defending him, glorifying him. And in fact, the whole story is absurd. It's so absurd that, you could write a novel about it. And I think a lot of people would say it's a bit overstretched. That would never actually happen. But it did happen. It seems to have happened. And we see it with other things. There was in America, Claudine Gay at Harvard University was president of Harvard, probably the most prestigious job in American academia. In fact, almost certainly the most prestigious job in American academia. And she was a plagiarist too. Allegedly, sorry, we should say in the case of Jim, but I mean, it is this parable of our times where because of we have institutionalized political correctness to such an incredible extent that the elite institutions. Cambridge is meant to be an elite institution. It is globally respected as one of the best universities in the world, and yet this happens. They appoint someone because of his story, because of how it makes them feel to have this figure in their presence. And it's absurd. And I mean, I'm glad that it seems to be unraveling.
That's a really important point about, Kremen says in this interview in 2023, Arday, and Arday is interviewing her. It's quite remarkable. And he asks, some say I'm just a token hire. What do you say to that? And she goes into depth about how, the university has listened to their black students and black voices, which was very hard to hear, she says, and she does all that kind of mea culpaing in a way for her institution. But that, I get, like that, Freddy is right, it's a parable for our times. Again, it's like, so the students are now hiring their own professors. I mean, that all of this is, the more you dig, the more absurd it is. I mean, I was thinking of, something like this is obviously a different context and a different issue, but the Carl Beach story, and how on the basis of sort of using a particular kind of issue, whether it's sort of like a Black Lives Matter identity or a mental health identity or something, fantasists can rise to the top and be lauded and protected and celebrated by some of the most powerful people in the country, in academia or in politics. And the thing that probably annoys me most about all of this is that in response to Jack Grove, the Times higher education journalist who got called by the police for sending Arday 3 emails, was that he was warned not to contact him again because it was affecting his mental health. So again, there's a whole nother novel you could write about the weaponization of mental health.
In that interview, she was asked by Arday, as you said, for her thoughts on people claiming he was a tokenistic appointment. She replied, "The board of electors on your interview day were absolutely unanimous. We're so lucky to have you. You're the best in the world in terms of the research that you do." I mean, it is fawning over him.
So embarrassing.
Yeah, well, this is a boss and an employee, effectively. And those are the words. Also tonight, Jason Arday's claimed the publisher of his memoir, which is still going ahead, by the way, it's still going to be published. I mean, the publisher's obviously probably pretty pleased about all this publicity, but he claims he was offered 1.4 million by the publisher so that they could snap up the book. The Times reporting this, the story is originally from The Guardian. Publishing sources said such a sum was far higher than the £10,000 advance they would normally have expected for a biography like the former professor's. One academic has said it's not, one publishing person has said it's not absolutely out of the realms of possibility if the US and the UK were competing for this memoir. But it does stretch a bit, doesn't it?
Well, it's even more ridiculous if it's true, isn't it?
Well, that's true. Actually, very true.
That's but I mean, it's the grifter element is very interesting. If indeed he is a grifter, which it looks to me like he is, although I could stand to be corrected, and he may turn out to be this wonderful academic. But I mean, I think it is this incredible opportunism combined with never really realizing that he was being an opportunist, just naturally absorbing the gaps and the opportunities that he was granted because everybody wanted to elevate him.
Yeah. Well, he isn't a fraud in the point of he's clearly a clever guy. He clearly gives a very good account of himself, but some of his backstory is questionable, and some of the methods and the ways and means in which he achieved his PhD may also be questionable. But he's not a complete pathological liar or anything. He clearly he will have had to have done something. He will have had to have had a lot about him to get to that position.
He was obviously very good at.
It's just that he didn't. Perhaps the assertion is he didn't earn that position on the basis that everything in his CV was true.
The threat of being called, perhaps I'm being unfair, but the threat of being called racist and the threat of, that sort of raised eyebrow of, are you really going to call me into question, is a very, very powerful tool. I mean, again, I don't want to have my phone ringing from the Met tonight or emails, trying to sue me in the morning. But it's now known that there have been several universities, one in South Africa, one in America, Glasgow, I think it was, or one UK one, saying, no, he wasn't a visiting professor here like he claimed. So, I mean, fraud may be a big word, but there certainly was a lot of stretching of his
potential
CV,
fictional elements, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Call it what you like.
Yeah.
It's, obviously he's smart. Although
But it is a
actually there's been
sad
some
tale
interesting
because-
sort of digging into what his
yeah.
a side thing is, like what he actually was doing as an academic was spending, a lot of his time sort of criticizing Paul Simon, for which I would take a huge amount of issue with. But it's not like he was sort of developing neuroscience. I mean, the guy isn't. I'm sort of incredulous at Kremen's excitement at him being the best in the world. You're like, at what?
Well, yes,
so
I think
his actual academic work needs some scrutiny.
I think
as well.
that is a stretch, but I mean, he is still a professor at Cambridge University, presumably there and in charge of students. So I mean, that's sort of what I'm saying. He can't be a fantasist because he clearly has ability. It's just that parts of his history potentially are not entirely true. And I also feel sorry for him as well, because are there aspects of his personality where he's been made aware that his ethnicity and his exceptionalism, because of his background, makes him a great hire? He's been brought into this university so desperate to level up. So I do actually feel a bit sorry for him as well, because he's sort of being, knowingly, by the way, but he's been lavished praise upon by his boss. You are the best in the world. No one's being critical of him either. They are also facilitating him. I'm going to have to move on, Freddie. Otherwise, but it's a fascinating conversation. Thank you, both of you.